Imagine standing at the edge of your property, looking down at the fresh snow and seeing footprints. They lead directly out of the dense forest and walk right up to your home. But as you trace the path with your eyes, you realise something freezing. There are no footprints leading back. This isn't an urban legend. This is exactly what happened to Andreas Gruber in March of 1922, just days before his entire family was wiped out in one of history's most chilling and completely unsolved cases. This is the true timeline of the Hinterkaifeck mystery. Hinterkaifeck wasn't a town. It was the unofficial name of a single isolated farm set deep in the Bavarian woods. About an hour outside of Munich, it was home to 6 people: 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and baby Josef. The 6th resident was the maid, but finding help for this farm wasn't easy. 6 months prior, their previous maid had packed her bags and fled in sheer panic. She told the surrounding village that she constantly heard bizarre noises in the attic and felt she was being watched. She swore the farm was ein Spukhaus. Andreas dismissed it as nonsense, but in late March 1922, the isolation of the farm began to crack. First came the footprints in the snow, leading to the farm but not away. Then, Andreas found a Munich newspaper on his property, a paper no one in the house had purchased. A few days later he heard heavy footsteps coming from the attic above. When he searched the property, he found no one. He mentioned these strange events to his neighbours, but when they offered a weapon to help, he refused. It was a fatal mistake. On Friday, March 31st, a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived for her very first day of work. That evening, a trap was set. According to police reconstructions, someone systematically lured the 4 older members of the family out into the barn, one by one. The killer was waiting in the dark. The coroner's report states they were struck down with extreme precision. The weapon was a Reutauer, a heavy German farming tool, similar to a pickaxe or a mattock. But the nightmare didn't end in the barn. The killer walked directly into the farmhouse. They went into the maid's bedchamber, striking down Maria on her first night. Finally, they walked into Victoria's bedroom, stopping at the crib of sleeping baby Josef. All 6 residents were gone. But this is where the timeline becomes truly, deeply disturbing. The culprit didn't run. Over the course of the weekend, neighbours in the distance saw smoke casually drifting from the farmhouse chimney. The cattle were fed. Meals were eaten in the kitchen. The intruder lived alongside the victims for days, before finally vanishing. By Tuesday, April 4th, the local village noticed the farm was too quiet. Young Cecilia had missed school, and the mail was piling up. A search party was organised, led by a neighbouring farmer named Lawrence Schlittenbauer. When they arrived at the farm, everything was locked, but Schlittenbauer didn't hesitate. He unhinged the door, walked into the barn, and discovered the bodies covered in hay. What happened next destroyed the investigation before it even began. Rather than waiting for the authorities, Schlittenbauer immediately began moving the bodies. Claiming he was looking for his baby son Josef, he completely compromised the crime scene. The Munich police, led by Inspector George Reingruber, didn't arrive for hours. By the time the detectives finally stepped onto the property, word had spread. Crowds of sightseers were wandering through the farm. People were shifting evidence, trampling footprints, and unbelievably, eating snacks in the Gruber's kitchen. Despite the ruined crime scene, police quickly zeroed in on a prime suspect, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer wasn't just a helpful neighbour. He had a prior intimate relationship with the widowed Victoria, and they were actively entangled in a bitter legal paternity dispute over baby Josef. Schlittenbauer's behaviour on the day of the discovery, his lack of shock, his intimate knowledge of the secured property, and his immediate contamination of the bodies made him the central focus of the police. But despite heavy interrogation, the authorities simply had no forensic evidence to tie him to the weapon. The autopsy itself was just as grim as the crime. Dr. Johann Baptista Müller performed the procedures right there in the barn courtyard. The coroner's findings revealed a heartbreaking detail about 7-year-old Cecilia. She had not died instantly. The young girl had survived her initial injuries and had lain in the hay next to her family for hours. The doctor noted she had pulled out clumps of her hair, a devastating testament to the shock and terror she endured in the dark. Desperate for a breakthrough, the Munich police resorted to highly unconventional methods. In a move that sounds like pure fiction, the doctor removed the skulls of all 6 victims. The police sent them to Munich, handing the actual physical remains over to local clairvoyants and psychics, hoping they could somehow divine the identity of the killer. The psychics provided no answers. Tragically, the skulls were stored in a Munich courthouse and were later lost entirely during the Allied bombings of World War II. Their victims were buried in a mass grave in the local cemetery without them. A year after the murders, the locals of Weidhofen couldn't bear to look at the property anymore. In 1923, the Hinterkaifeck farm was completely demolished. The buildings were torn down to the foundations, erasing their haunted farm from the map entirely. Today, only a small stone memorial shrine stands in the empty field where the house once stood. Over the last century, the Munich police and independent investigators have interviewed and evaluated over 100 suspects. One of the most prominent and strictly investigated theories revolved around a ghost from the past, Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel. Karl was officially reported dead in the trenches of World War I in 1914, years before the tragedy even happened. However, after the events at Hinterkaifeck, rumours swept through the region that Karl had survived the war, deserted and returned home. The theory suggested that upon finding his wife with a new baby, fathered by another man, he exacted a brutal revenge. Police took this seriously enough to track down soldiers from Karl's regiment, but multiple men confirmed they saw Karl fall in combat. The authorities then dismissed the theory. They interrogated various drifters, former farmhands, and locals, all the way up to the 1950s, yielding nothing. The files were officially reopened in 1986 for a fresh review by the German authorities, but the trail was entirely cold. Then came the final massive bombshell in 2007. Students at the German Police Academy used modern criminal profiling and investigation techniques to analyse century-old evidence. They combed through every surviving document, autopsy report, and witness statement. Their final report concluded that the initial crime scene was far too contaminated to secure legal conviction today. However, the students revealed something chilling. Based on the behavioural profiling, they actually did identify a single prime suspect who they believe was entirely responsible. But we will never know who it is, because the suspects have long since passed away. The Academy decided to permanently seal the suspect's name out of respect for the living, innocent descendants. The police know who did it, but the public never will. So officially, the Hinterkaifeck case remains completely unsolved. A stranger walked out of the frozen woods, lived in the attic, violently took 6 lives and vanished back into history. Who do you think was hiding in the attic? Was it the neighbour, the husband, or a monster completely unknown to history? Drop your theories down in the comments. Thank you for watching Shadow Docket Files, and I'll see you in the next mystery.